Chapter 37. Someone had knocked on the door. I was staring at a wall. I was in bed. I was wearing pajamas. My clothes were folded on the chair. It was daylight, very early, the first thin sunlight on the tops of the pines outside. I looked at my watch, just before 6 o'clock. I sat on the edge of the bed. I had a black plunge of shame, of humiliation, of having been naked in front of Conchis, of having been in his power. Even worse, others could have seen. Julie. I saw myself lying there, and all of them sitting and grinning, while Conchis asked me questions, and I gave naked answers. But Julie, he must also hypnotize her. This was why she could not lie. Svengali and Trilby. Then the mystical experience itself, still so vivid, as the details of a drive in new country, hit me. I saw how it had been done. There would have been some drug, some hallucinogene in the Rocky, perhaps the stramonium of his paper. Then he had suggested these things, these stages of knowledge. He had induced them as I lay there helpless. I looked round for the green-bound volume of his medical papers, but it was not in the room. I was to be denied even that clue. The richness of what I remembered, the potential embarrassment of what I could not, the good of it and the evil of it, these two things made me sit for minutes with my head in my hands, torn between resentment and gratitude. I went and washed, stared at myself in the mirror, went down to the coffee the silent Maria had waiting for me. I knew Conchis would not appear. Maria would say nothing. Nothing was to be explained. Everything was planned to keep me in suspense until I came again. As I walked back to the school, I tried to assess the experience. Why, though it was so beautiful, so intensely real, it seemed also so sinister. It was difficult in that early morning light and landscape to believe that anything on earth was sinister. Yet the feeling persisted with me, and it was not only one of humiliation. It was one of new danger, of meddling in darker, stranger things that needed to be meddled with. It also made Julie's fear of Conchis much more convincing than his pseudo-medical pity for her. She might just be schizophrenic, but he was proven a hypnotist. But this was to assume that they were not working together to trick me. And then I began clawing in a panic of memory through all my meetings with Conchis, trying to see if he could ever have hypnotized me before without my being aware of it. I remembered bitterly that only the afternoon before I had said to Julie that my sense of reality was like gravity. For a while I was like a man in space, whirling through madness. I remembered Conchis's trance-like state during the Apollo scene. Had he hypnotized me into imagining it all? Had he willed me to go to sleep when I did that afternoon, so conveniently placed for the Fulks apparition? Had there ever been a man and a girl standing there? Now Julie even. But I recalled the feel of her skin, of those ungiving lips. I got back to earth, but I was badly shaken. It was not only the being hypnotized by Conchis that unanchored me. In a subtler but similar way, I knew I had been equally hypnotized by the girl. I had always believed, and not only out of cynicism, that a man and a woman could tell in the first 10 minutes whether they wanted to go to bed together, and that the time that passed after those first 10 minutes represented a tax, which might be worth paying if the article promised to be really enjoyable, but which 9 times out of 10 became rapidly excessive. It wasn't only that I foresaw a very steep bill with Julie. She shook my whole theory. She had a certain exhalation of surrender about her, as if she was a door waiting to be pushed open. But it was the darkness beyond that held me. Perhaps it was partly a nostalgia for that extinct Laurentian woman of the past, the woman inferior to man in everything but that one great power of female dark mystery and beauty, the brilliant virile male and the dark swooning female. The essences of the two sexes had become so confused in my androgynous 20th century mind that this reversion to a situation where a woman was a woman and I was obliged to be fully a man had all the fascination of an old house after a cramped, anonymous modern flat. I had been enchanted into wanting sex often enough before, but never into wanting love. All that morning I sat in classes, teaching as if I was still hypnotized, in a dream of hypotheses. Now I saw Conchis as a sort of psychiatric novelist sans novel, creating with people, not words. Now I saw him as a complicated, but still very perverse old man. Now as a Svengali, now as a genius among practical jokers. But whichever way I saw him, I was fascinated. And Julie, as Lily with her hair blown sideways, with her tear-stained face at that first moment, in the lamplight, cool ivory, I didn't try to pretend that I was anything else than quite literally bewitched by Bharani. It was almost a force, like a magnet, drawing me out of the classroom windows, through the blue air to the central ridge, and down there where I so wanted to be. The rows of olive-skinned faces, bent black heads, the smell of chalk dust, an old ink stain that Rorschached my desk. They were like things in a mist, real yet unreal, obstacles in limbo. After lunch, Demetriadis came into my room and wanted to know who Allison was, and began being obscene, dreadful stock Greek facetiae about tomatoes and cucumbers, when I refused to tell him anything. I shouted at him to fuck off, had to push him out by force. He was offended and spent the rest of the week avoiding me. I didn't mind. It kept him out of my way. After my last lesson, I couldn't resist it. I had to go back to Bharani. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had to re-enter the domain. As soon as I saw it, the hive of secrets lying in the last sunshine over the seething pine tops far below, I was profoundly relieved, as if it might not have been still there. The closer I got, the more nefarious I felt, and the more nefarious I became. I simply wanted to see them, to know they were there, waiting for me. I approached at dusk from the east, slipped between the wire, and walked down cautiously past the statue of Poseidon, over the gully, and through the trees to where I could see the house. Every window at the side was shuttered up. There was no smoke from Maria's cottage. I worked round to where I could see the front of the house. The French windows under the colonnade were shuttered. So were the ones that led from Conchis' bedroom on to the terrace. It was clear that no one was there. I walked back through the darkness, feeling depressed and increasingly furious that Conchis could spirit his world away, deprive me of it, like a callous drug ward doctor with some hooked addict. The next day I wrote a letter to Mitford, telling him that I'd been to Bharani, met Conchis, and begging him to come clean on his own experience there. I sent it to the address in Northumberland. I also saw Karazoglu again, and tried to coax more information out of him. He was obviously quite sure that Leverrier had never met Conchis. He told me what I already knew, that Leverrier had been religious. He had used to go to Mass in Athens, and he said more or less the same thing as Conchis. Il avait toujours l'air un peu triste, il ne s'est jamais habitué à la vie ici. Yet Conchis had also said that he had made an excellent seeker. I got Leverrier's address in England out of the school bursar, but then decided not to write. I had it to hand if I needed it. I also did a little research on Artemis. She was Apollo's sister in mythology, protectress of virgins and patroness of hunters. The saffron dress, the buskins, and the silver bow, the crescent new moon, constituted her standard uniform in classical poetry. Though she seemed permanently trigger-happy where amorous young men were concerned, I could find no mention of her being helped by her brother. She was an element in the ancient matriarchal cult of the triple moon goddess, linked with Astarte in Syria and Isis in Egypt. Isis, I noted, was often accompanied by the jackal-headed Anubis, guardian of the underworld, who later became Cerberus. On Tuesday and Wednesday, prep duties kept me at the school. On Thursday, I went over to Barani again. Nothing had changed. It was as deserted as it had been on the Monday. I walked round the house, tried the shutters, roamed the grounds, went down to the private beach from which the boat was gone. Then I sat brooding for half an hour in the twilight, under the colonnade. I felt both exploited and excluded, and as much angry with myself as with them. I was mad to have got involved in the whole business, and even madder, both to want it to go on and be frightened of its going on. I had changed my mind once again. In those intervening days, more and more I no longer knew about the schizophrenia. From faintly possible, it began to grow probable. I could not imagine why else he should have halted the mask so abruptly, if it had only been an amusement. I suppose there was a large component of envy, too. I thought of Conchi's foolishness or arrogance in leaving the Modigliani and the Bonars like that in a deserted house. And from those Bonars, my mind grasshoppered to Allison. There was, that day, a special midnight boat to take the boys and masters back to Athens for their half-term holiday. It meant sitting up all night, dozing in an armchair in the scruffy first-class saloon. But it gave one the Friday in Athens. I'm not quite sure what it was, anger, spite, revenge, that made me decide to take the boat. It was certainly not the thought of Allison, beyond a need of someone to talk to. Perhaps it was a last whiff of my old would-be existentialist self, founding freedom on caprice. A minute later, I was walking fast down the track to the gate. Even then, at the last moment, I looked back and hoped, with 1,000th of a hope, that someone might be beckoning me to return. But no one was, so I embarked for my lack of a better.